Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
I'm Susan Salenger, and I'm 79 years old and just released my first book. I've been a writer all my life. My husband and I produced corporate training films for over 25 years, and I wrote the scripts and I wrote the workbooks that accompanied the videos. My new book, Sidelined: How Women Manage and Mismanage Their Health, describes the hurdles that women need to jump in order to get the health care they want. As many of you already know, some of those hurdles come from the medical community. Gender discrimination still occurs, unfortunately. But those hurdles are the ones that are more difficult to control. The other hurdles come from inside ourselves, and those are the hurdles that we can more easily overcome. I interviewed over 40 women and I extrapolated some of the things that they had in common and that they did where they did their health a disservice. So that's what this book explores and helps resolve. So let me jump right into it, and you'll hear a little bit about why I wrote the book, and we can go from there. So scared, hungry, and half tranquilized, I watched while hospital staff wheeled me into the operating room. I was furious at myself for consenting to have surgery I was confident I didn't need. Yet here I was, lying on a gurney, hooked up to IV tubes, surrounded by hospital personnel, and feeling vulnerable, foolish, and ashamed. I'll tell you about my operation in a bit. It went fine. This is not a story about tragedy, but it is a story about how we as women manage and sometimes mismanage our health care. As a group, we're very conscientious about taking care of ourselves. We choose our doctors carefully. We visit them more frequently than men do. We try to keep up with all our tests and we stay on top of the latest health information. But sometimes inadvertently make decisions that can undermine our own health. For example, sometimes there's simply no time for a routine checkup. It may be too hard to take time off from work, or there's no one to watch our kids. We may blame ourselves for getting sick and feel too ashamed and embarrassed to call the doctor, which of course can only make us feel even worse and more vulnerable. Or, and this is the one that means the most to me, we may hesitate to get a second opinion because we don't want to hurt our primary doctor's feelings. After all, we don't want to be thought difficult or worse, rude. We can get so caught up in our fears and our everyday lives that by failing to seek timely medical care, we do ourselves a disservice. Then, should unanticipated consequences develop, we say to ourselves, as I did, what in the world was I thinking? That is how I got into the book from my surgery that I didn't need. I was right, I didn't need it. And so I thought, gee, I wonder if other women also make decisions that they later regret. And of course, I found out that many of us do many different times.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors. I am so excited you guys are joining us today. I have the fabulous Miss Susan with us. Hello, madam. How are you?
I am fine, thank you.
I am so happy you're here. And this is such a really powerful subject that you have tackled, that you have decided to jump into it. You gave us a little taste of what got you started with the book. Tell us, what can our listeners expect from the rest of the book?
They can expect to hear some of the things that as women, most of us do some of the time. The same woman can make a fabulous decision one time when she's ill and a not so fabulous one the next time. It depends on our disease. It depends on what's going on in our lives at the time. But you'll hear what other women have done and what they have done about it. So I think it's a really important book for all women.
You have interviewed so many different women to come together to put this book together. How long did it take you to do all those interviews?
You're going to laugh. Took me 10 years. Obviously not full time, But, by the time I found the women and heard their stories and then went through them and tried to extrapolate what they had in common, because they all had different diseases, and I did that. I was interested in their behaviors, not in their diseases. So, and then I put together some focus groups, and then I researched to see if there was any literature to back up what I was finding, and there was. So it took quite a while. Then I had to write it and rewrite it. You've written. So anybody out there that's ever written knows exactly what I mean by writing, rewriting, and then rewriting what you've rewritten. So it goes on and on.
When it comes to medical information, especially when it comes to book to provide information to the community, 5 to 10 years is not a bad time frame because you are looking deep into it, and especially when you're taking personal anecdotes.
Right, right. I did do that. And people were so lovely. The women were so lovely and so generous. And their sole purpose in talking to me was to help other women. And it was just really a lovely experience.
When you were talking to them and telling them, "Hey, I'm putting this book together for this purpose," what was their first reaction?
That's wonderful. Every one of them said that. I'm so glad to be a part of it. I'm so glad you asked me. Let me tell you my story. Most of them, I barely had to ask any questions. They just talked. They were just delightful, just delightful. And I'm very grateful to all of them.
Did you have to change anybody's name?
I'm glad you asked me that. I changed most of the names. There were 2 or 3 people that asked me to keep their own name, but I changed their names and their locations because some of them wanted total privacy. Because some of what they told me was quite intimate, particularly the women that I interviewed that had had hysterectomies. And, they told me about their sexual lives, and they didn't want that out there, and of course, I understood that. I wouldn't have either. But they were so generous to talk to me about it. And it was interesting. They said, "Well, I don't mind telling you because I'll never see you again." So it was lovely. And they were right. That's the beauty of interviewing because you can get a lot of information from people because they know that it's private and they know they're not gonna have to face you at their next cocktail party or whatever.
That is actually very accurate, and we feel a lot more comfortable sometime with a stranger because I might not have to have this conversation again, and you don't know any of my friends, and they don't have to
Right,
know any of that.
exactly.
That's a great technique for anybody listening. Hey, sometimes it's easier to interview a stranger than try to question your families and friends.
I did interview a couple of friends, and I won't do that again because I found myself holding back as well. I'm not gonna ask a friend about her sex life or about what her side effects were unless she chooses to tell me. That's a no-no. I learned myself as I interviewed, as I went through the process.
It's so much easier to separate the two because it'll give you the freedom to truly ask those questions that you need for the book.
Exactly, exactly.
While this is a book focused for women, what can men take out of that? Because they have daughters, they have sisters, they have a spouse. Should a men pick this up and what should they be expecting for themselves?
Yes, that's a great question. And men should pick this up because they have sisters, daughters, wives, mothers. And I think it's important to know what the females in your life go through some of the time when they try to get health care. Because men really don't go through them. I'm sure they have other issues. I did not research men, but they don't have some of the hurdles to jump that women do. And I think that that's important for men to, so that they can be supportive. They need to understand how hard it can be for women to get the kind of medical care that they feel they need.
As you were doing your research, did you find one or two things that were the culprit? Why do we receive this kind of treatments compared to men?
First of all, we hesitate sometimes to ask for it. We go to the doctor, and a lot of the times we minimize our symptoms or we really don't ask questions because we don't want to be rude. And one of the things that I think is the most important chapters in the book is on second opinion. Women hesitate to get second opinions. Men get them much more than we do. We don't want to be rude. And as I think I said earlier, we don't want to hurt the doctor's feelings. And one woman said to me she was really afraid to ask about a second opinion because she didn't want to be labeled a bad patient and have that on her chart. Throughout her medical career, that would be on her chart. So I think that that's the most important thing. And think it's also because women are more likely to be misdiagnosed than men are. 12 million Americans are misdiagnosed each year. And women and minorities are 20 to 30% more likely to be misdiagnosed. So I think a second opinion is just critical. And frankly, if I'd had one, I would not have gone through my surgery. I mean, this is truly a question of do what I say, not what I did. Uh,
Well, I think is really amazing because you had doubt from the beginning.
Yeah.
And how many times, and women especially, we do it all the time. In our gut, we know there's something wrong.
Yep.
I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know if I'm really confident to do this. And yet we still go through it and don't listen to ourselves. We downplay ourselves as much as anybody else does it.
Yep.
You have these questions and you going, I think I'm going to do it. I don't feel comfortable doing it. That's huge.
Well, the doctor's usually right, not always. I mean, they make mistakes like we all do. But I mean, I think if I had to sum this book up in one sentence, I would say it's learning how to get out of your own way.
I completely agree with you. I am fortunately at in my early 30s, I had one of those experiences that I realized you're not listening to me. I showed up to a doctor's office and I was in crucial pain and they tested for everything and still couldn't figure it out. It was one of those like, are we just guessing? Because I can guess just as good as you can. I'm sure I can find a book and just
Right.
point at something, but I understand the concept behind of not being heard and
Yeah.
getting frustrated. Because what we forget to tell, especially for our listeners, is once you've been told you're fine so many times, then you think it's in your head and
Hmm.
you start questioning your own sanity. I was like, okay, this cannot be the way I'm supposed to feel forever because I'm hurting. What is
Right.
going on?
Right. I think there's two things that reminds me of and that are also in the book. Number one, women patients describe their symptoms differently to doctors than men do. Men are much more succinct and get to the point. Women talk about how they feel about being ill. This is a silly example, but I use it over and over. If you have a sore throat, a man will go in and say, my throat hurts, and done almost. I'll go in, or as a woman, women will go in and say, throat hurts and I'm tired and I'm really having trouble taking care of my kids because I don't feel 100% and that's stressing me out and. So there's a lot of emotional symptoms that women describe that men don't. And so sometimes the physical symptoms can get subsumed by all of the emotional ones and the doctor can go down the wrong track. And I think that's very important. And again, when we sound like a broken record, that's why we need second opinions. But also in the doctor's defense, and I think this is so important because most doctors, of course, are very, very good. And there's about 20 to 30,000 different diseases out there, many of which have similar symptoms. Plus, women get autoimmune diseases, which are much tougher to diagnose. I mean, if you go in with a pain in your leg and the x ray shows that you broke your leg, well, the diagnosis is obvious. But most autoimmune diseases are not that simple, and women do suffer more from depression and anxiety. So the doctor is not really off the wall if he can't find anything. They're called medically unexplained symptoms. If he can't find any symptoms, and he does know or she does know that women suffer more from stress, it's certainly a logical diagnosis and can be a first step. What's important for women to ask is, what else could this possibly be? That's an important question.
And that's one that we normally don't ask
Correct.
because I never would have thought about it asking, okay, what else? Which is interesting because anytime a doctor gives you a bottle pill or a container, it gives you all these weird side effects.
Right.
How many of us actually read it?
Yes, I do. Thank God, because I wrote this book. Now I do. I shouldn't have said it that way because before I didn't either. And the print's small, and I just want to swallow the pill and I want to go about my life.
Became very aware of side effects with one of my friends was having all these conditions and nobody was listening. And finally she goes, "Oh my God, half of my conditions are due to the pills that they were giving me before." And I was like,
Yeah.
are you serious?
Yes. I'll tell you a story about my mother because my mom was about, I don't know, in her early 70s. I mean, sharp as a tack. She was healthy. She was on, I think, blood pressure medication. I mean, basically no medication, was just fine. Something happened with her knee. I don't even remember. And she went in for some outpatient surgery, I guess. They gave her some pain pills and stuff. She came home. And within about 24 hours, she was really senile. She couldn't remember her name. She couldn't remember her birthday. I mean, my dad and I called the doctor in a panic, who met us at his office and examined her. And the only thing she could remember was the phone number of her beauty shop. Nothing else. I mean, it was just terrible. I was crying. And I kept saying to the doctor, Steve, this has got to be something else. I mean, nobody goes senile in 24 hours. It's not possible. And he took me aside and he said, "Sue, I know you're a close family and your parents are getting older and you're making it really hard for them. You're not letting them grow old graciously." And I got so upset, but I knew that something was wrong. And fortunately, so did my dad. And we went home, threw out the pills. Turned out she was allergic to one of them. So, what I call that is you get a generic diagnosis. As a woman, you could be generically diagnosed with stress, or if you're older, but it was the medication. She wasn't senile. Nobody could go from A to Z in one night. But diagnoses are not always accurate, and they're very hard to do. Depending on the disease, they can be really tricky.
Yeah. It's also very hard if you don't have sometimes a primary care that can actually watch all your charts.
Yes, yeah.
Those are something to consider. I am so excited and so proud that you have taken on this book because this
Thank
is
you.
such a huge topic of discussion. And sometimes a lot of the things that we see is nobody knows where to start.
Right. As you start at home, make a list of your symptoms, write them down because you think you know your agenda in your head. But if you're like me, I get anxious when I go to the doctor. Plus, I want to be a good patient. So I'm very busy making nice and being social and trying to remember what it was I came in for. So make a list. That's really important. And take notes as you are in the interview so that you can go back and review. And the other thing that I always tell women or people really, and men should do this too, is repeat back what you hear the doctor say. That gives you a chance to make sure that you heard correctly. It gives the doctor a chance to clarify something that maybe he or she didn't say clearly or that perhaps you misunderstood. You want to go out with a clear understanding of your diagnosis. And yet, I read somewhere that over 50% of women don't tell the doctor when they don't understand something. And that's not good. You really need to be clear that you understand what you're being told and that you know what medication you're taking, why you're taking it, and you want the name of your disease so that you can go home and do your research and look it up and know what you're dealing with. You want all the information you can get.
One of the things that we see a lot of people, even when I'm teaching adults or any kind of classes, is if something hits them or hits us that we don't understand, our mind shuts down and
Mhm.
we fixate on that one thing and we stop listening to everything else.
Right.
So, God forbid your doctor says, "Hey, you have this." Anything after that, you're probably not listening. Like he
Right.
might have told you the cure for cancer. You missed that whole entire story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's always good to take somebody with you so that 4 ears are definitely better than two.
And they're usually a lot more dispassionate because there's not them. They
Yes.
can take notes. They're listening to, okay, that's great.
Right.
I'm glad that you got that part. But what are we going to do about it? Like that
Exactly.
person, yeah, we're still stuck in what we have. You
Yeah.
two know, you told
Oh,
me I had what? Wait.
exactly. No, you're so right. And he get anxious. We all do. I mean, and rightfully so. Who doesn't?
And the older we get, let me put it this way: once you hit the age of 37,
Yeah.
age becomes something that we're thinking about. I was like, wait, what's just happened? So with
When he hit 70.
I cannot wait because I want to hit 70, look as fabulous as you are, and still rise. So,
Thank you.
but we stop thinking about every day and become like, oh my God, I want to die. It's like, you're not
Right.
going to die. It
Right.
will be okay.
Right.
We become teenagers again and everything die. It's so funny how
It all changes.
we become super dramatic again. But it is something very important to have somebody there with you.
Yeah.
Hopefully, bring somebody who doesn't get very emotional, or else there will be two of you
Right.
panicking.
Right. You're right. That's a good point. That's a
Yes. Get
very good point.
anytime I need to go to the doctors, my mom needs to come because she does not
Yeah.
panic for anything. She's like taking notes. Take
That
somebody that can take those notes for you. They're not going to fall apart with you. That if you start crying, they can squeeze your hand and still listen.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's incredibly beneficial. And one of the other things I want to mention that I don't know that I have at the back of my book, there's a resource list. It took me quite a while to compile it. It tells you how to do the research, how to research your doctor, how to research a hospital if you need to, how to research your symptoms. And I think that that's so important that you stay on top. You want to know, is your hospital a good one for your particular procedure? Is that what's your doctor's specialty? What are the possible ramifications of your disease? What are the symptoms? I mean, there's so much to figure out. And you'll feel better if you feel in control. It will help you.
Knowledge has that power to give you a sense of groundedness, and you're not floating up here like something happens. You're like, oh my God, I'm just dying. Like you don't
Right.
feel so helpless.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm all about get a second opinion. Love
Yeah.
that advice.
Yes.
So, switching a little bit more into your writing side, what advice would you give a brand new author that has the passion, like you said, like something happened, they want to write about something that is nonfiction? What would be the thing you tell them to how to just get started?
Well, I think I'd tell them a couple of things. I have to think about that a minute, but I think it's important to know, or at least in the beginning, know what you want to write about. And the reason I added in the beginning is for me, I started out to write a book about women's surgeries. And I did about, I don't know, a month's work on it. And I thought, I'm not really interested in this. I'm not quite in the right direction. So the book changed from women's surgeries to women's behavior during illness. You have to leave the door open or your mind open. So the research I did on women's surgeries, I interviewed women with hysterectomies because it was a surgery. That was how I got to them. So I think as I interviewed them, I thought to myself, they had similar behaviors. I could hear it. And I realized that I was much more interested in that. So you have to be prepared to do a 180. That's how it goes. And I think the second thing I would say is to you've got a first draft that you're satisfied with. If you possibly can afford it, hire a professional editor. I started out with, I think, 300 pages, and now I think I'm down to whatever, about 200, but some of that's the resource list. So she cut out a lot. She helped me organize it because you really can't evaluate your own work. You read into it, you can't help it because you know what you meant, but what you wrote may be quite different from what you meant.
Those are great advice, especially for nonfiction. You want to make sure that if you're going to be spending months and months in research,
Yes.
that you're doing something that is going to be passionate towards you. You don't
Right.
want to spend all this time and then be like, I hate this.
Right. Exactly. That's true. And that is kind of what happened. It just wasn't for me. But it
If
was,
you do change your mind,
yeah, I
it's
changed.
okay.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I think what made me change my mind was the women themselves, because the hysterectomy women that I met were very ashamed of having hysterectomies. And the women I met that had cesareans were very ashamed of having cesareans. And I didn't realize that shame is such a big part of women's reaction to either having procedures or being ill, because I met many women that were ashamed of being ill. And that startled me. A lot of women blame their illness on stress. So they think to themselves, I know I'm sick. I've got too much stress. I can't manage my stress. So they feel that their stress caused them to be sick and that their sickness, if you're following this, is almost a public manifestation of their inability to manage their lives. They feel that everybody knows that they can't manage their lives and can't manage their stress, and that's why they're sick. So to go back to what you said, if a doctor tells you it's all in your head, that confirms what you already thought. So now you go out feeling even worse than when you came in. It's a vicious circle.
And that is such a huge revelation to understand that people honestly feel ashamed and they beating themselves up for something that, let's be honest, we have no control of our environments. We have no control a lot of the times on the food that's being prepared for us.
Right.
How do we get to beat ourselves up and blame ourselves for something that can be out of our control?
I think I know one of the main points of the book is that illness is random. I mean, not always. Certainly, if you smoke and you get lung cancer, there may be a correlation. But think about the people that smoke that don't get lung cancer. And what about the people that drink that don't get liver disease or whatever? I mean, there's sometimes, of course, there's a correlation. I'm not saying, that there isn't, but not always. So before you blame yourself, think it through. Be really careful. There was a little study done. I mean, I'm laughing because it's funny, but it isn't funny, where women who thought they were having a heart attack, they hesitated to call 911. About half of them hesitated to call 911 because they didn't want the paramedics to see their messy house. They were ashamed of their messy house. They didn't want to bother anybody. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Someone died.
This is how strange we are and how we're being programmed. Because I'm pretty sure men are not going to think twice.
Uh-uh.
They're like, just
Yeah.
step over the cat. Don't worry about it. You just keep walking across.
In a case like that, shame could be fatal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is so huge.
It is. And the other thing that I think is huge is how often women put themselves last. There was another study done where women were given 5 things. What would they care for to put them in order of priority? So the first thing we care for is our children. The second thing we care for is our pets, if you can believe that. The third thing is our elderly parents, family, whatever. Fourth is our significant others, and last is ourselves. So that is
Wow.
the message of the book is please take care of yourself first. Even the airline tells you to put on your own mask before you put on your kids.
We don't listen.
Right.
We're always want to save the world and we want to take care of everybody else. And then when we're left depleted, then we're wondering what happened.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
nobody was making deposits into accounts to
Ex-
include ourselves.
Right. You can take better care of others if you take care of yourself. If you don't feel good, how do you take care of somebody else? It's not easy. You'll be in better shape to take care and save the world.
Absolutely. So, madam, are you working on anything else?
I'm working on a couple of articles, not another book. I want to write an article about shame. And I feel very strongly about what's going on in politics today. And I think that women's health is really at risk. And so I want to write about that. I've started it and I'm doing some research. It takes a minute. I've forgotten. I've been writing for so long. I forgot how much work the research is.
I'm tackling a new project. And that was kind of the conversation today. I was like, this is going to take some time. As I'm taking 2 books from the library, I was like, I
Right.
guess I'll start.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, oh, I can do this. And I started flipping through, oh, I have to go over here. And then I went over. Yeah, it's the same process all over again.
And it doesn't matter how long it is, the process does not change.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, and I'm trying to write opinion pieces, and they are short. I mean, they're under 2,000 words generally. And I just wrote a whole book, but it's still taking me forever.
The process is the change. This is
Yep.
the same. You cannot cheat it.
Yep.
Tell us, madam, where can our listeners find the book when they can learn more about you?
They can find the book at susansalenger.com. That's Salenger. We spell it a little differently. And it's also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local independent bookstore, wherever you buy books. That's where the book is available. And it's called Sidelined: How Women Manage and Mismanage Their Health by Susan Salenger, Enger.
Have one of those complicated first names so I understand.
Yeah.
So I go by DC. You can't mess that up.
And I went to research the book on Amazon and I put in Susan Salenger and I put Enger. It's my name. I know how to spell it. And they kept trying to correct me.
But it's been so much fun and I'm so glad you're here. But before you leave us, are you ready for the lightning round?
I am
Okay. Easy peasy. Don't think too much. Let's see. Water or juice?
water.
Hey. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Me too. Or cold?
Hot.
Okay. Ebook or print?
Print. Oh, by far.
Here's a little different. What is your favorite place to write?
My office, where I am right now.
That's pretty awesome. But been an absolute pleasure. Do you have any closing remarks for us?
I really don't, except please, if you decide to buy the book, please use the resource section. It's really good, if I say so myself. And if you're unsure about your diagnosis at all, get a second opinion, get a second opinion, get a second opinion.
That is a powerful advice for everybody. Please do so. Put yourself first. Take care of yourself. Know that you are meant for greatness and we want you here. Miss
Right.
Susan, congratulations.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much for having me. It was really fun. I
It
really
was
appreciate it.
a pleasure. It's been a blast. Thank you for joining us. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us and Inside the Minds of Authors. Go ahead, follow Miss Susan, like our podcast, share with your friends. We know we're always better when we're together. Huge shout out to the Patreon community for helping make this podcast possible. Bye, everyone.